capabilities of that new medium. So as with mobile, we started out with, let's take our internet site and put it on mobile. Well, that's a way to start. That's a way to get used to things. But eventually, we learn how to use the very unique capabilities of mobile to do things in new ways. And that's what we're going to be hearing about today, because one of the unique capabilities of mobile is its location ability. And Amy is going to relate that to storytelling. So Amy Schmitz Weiss from San Diego State University. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Oh, yes, super important. Good morning, everybody. I would first like to thank Brant and Pam and Gary and the whole staff here that's made this possible. You guys have done a fantastic job, so big kudos to all of you for making this two-day conference possible. I've learned a ton of stuff already from everyone that's been here, and I'm excited about the rest of today, too, and learning from the folks this afternoon. So today I wanted to talk with you about the next frontier in mobile. Kim talked about this a little bit ago in terms of looking at the future and where we can take storytelling forms. Yusuf talked about the aspects of how we can think differently about mobile journalism. And then yesterday we had some really unique points that were brought up by all the folks yesterday too in thinking differently about mobile. And so today I'm hoping to complement what some of those folks have already discussed with you guys about and kind of get you in a different mindset as well, thinking about mobile in particular. And so first of all, I want to start off with a story. And in this conference, stories are an important part, right, to journalism. So I want you to think about this for a minute. Imagine yourself in a playground with your children or perhaps with your siblings. And you're sitting there having a great time, watching the kids play. But all of a sudden you start to hear sirens going off. And all of a sudden you see a fire engine zoom right past the playground. Then you see a police car go right down the street past the playground. And another fire engine, and another police car, and the sirens are going off. And you're starting to wonder what's going on. And you're thinking, is this something really serious? Because it's in the vicinity of where I am. And you've got your kids or you've got your sisters or brothers with you in the playground. In those moments, we often think, maybe something's happening. Maybe I should check on here really quick. But as you go on, you look at Twitter, you look at Google, you look at whatever other news source that might be there, nothing. Within those first few seconds. So of course, what are you going to do? You're going to leave, probably, right? In those moments, it may not be safe. And so figuring out exactly what is going on and what's happening leaves you in a quandary. So, of course, you take your kids or your brothers or sisters with you and head home. And perhaps later you find out what may have happened, right? Another story. This is Sarah. She's sitting in a coffee shop. She's thinking about what she wants to do tonight for dinner. And she actually ended up going out to dinner last week with her friends, went to a place, had a really bad burrito. Didn't work out so well for her with her friends. And so she doesn't want to repeat that again this weekend with her friends going out for the night. So she's, of course, looking on Yelp, seeing all these different reviews of what people are saying for this restaurant or that. And she's really excited about the opportunities. But at the same time, the burrito place that she went to last weekend got her super sick. No one had told her about it. No one had mentioned it on the reviews. And so she's a little hesitant on picking a place just because it has good reviews. She really is looking for some additional information and context. How well is this restaurant? How good is their health inspections, perhaps? How good practices do they have in that particular restaurant? But that information's missing. So she's going to toss the dice to figure out where she's going to go with her friends tonight for dinner. Fingers crossed that she doesn't get sick. Next story. This is Jake. Jake is actually thinking about getting a house. He's put up enough money at this point in his career. He's anxious to get out of the apartment he's in and have his own place. So he's been spending the past few weeks trying to figure out what house he wants to get, and he's got a couple in mind. He's visited a couple different places. So he's hanging out in front of this one park that's next to a house that he was just recently looking at. But he's curious. He wants to know exactly, is this particular neighborhood safe? He's never lived in this neighborhood before. He's not too familiar with it. And so he's trying to figure out what are some of the perhaps crimes that have happened in this area in the past month, past week. So he may do a search on Google, might look at a few hashtags on Twitter, may even go onto a news site to look up that neighborhood. Does he find anything? Perhaps not. He may find maybe one article from a year ago about a robbery that happened. But where can he get that information from? How is he going to be able to make the right decision in terms of knowing if that neighborhood that he's going to make this decision to live in for maybe 10, 20 years is the right one? What do all three of these particular people have in common? It's the need for context. Context is such an important part of our life today and how we get around, how we do anything from moment to moment. And a lot of that context is based on, oops, sorry, it escaped my presentation here. Context ties back into exactly how we move around in the spaces and places that we go through every day. And these actions are shaped by our mobile device. Whether we realize it or not, it's happening pretty much throughout the day. And as a result, we are now in this mode of what is called contextual awareness as well as contextual sensitivity. We are more attuned to wanting context and information, thus in turning it into knowledge to make the best decisions about what we're doing. And as a result, it's shaping exactly how we go about our day. And it's driven a lot more actions, what we do, how we communicate, what we actually consume, all through this device. And with that said, as a result, we are providing a new identity, a new sense of meaning to all the places and spaces that we visit. Every single time we go to a building, we go to a museum, we go to a park, perhaps we go to a new restaurant. We are providing a sense of making meaning in all these places, and those who came before us and those who will come after us. And in aggregate, those places and spaces are being shaped by all of us and creating a different identity in many cases than the original intent of that particular place or space. If you go to a restaurant, you may think, oh, well, this is a good restaurant. I'm going to eat here, it has good reviews. But the restaurant may have a deeper meaning that in terms of the cultural nuances behind that restaurant, the unique food to that restaurant that makes that community, as well as the people who come to that restaurant time and time again. That shapes a different identity of it just having a brand, but really being something altogether different for that community. And so exactly where does journalism fit into this? Well, really, journalism at the end of the day is the connector between these particular places and spaces and the location and the deeper meaning that comes into it that helps to shape a community ultimately. And again, when we think about this, it really is driven in many ways by the location of what people are doing every minute of the day. So you may have heard the term location, location, location. No, this is not about real estate. Focused on journalism. But it's important to recognize that this is something that is underlying everything that happens with our mobile consumption today. And it's something that often we don't think about. We take it for granted. But it really is a significant aspect of our daily lives and exactly how much location is playing a role. For instance, let me poll you guys just right now. How many of you have looked at Google Maps within the past, or Apple Maps, or some map app within the past 24 hours? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have used Yelp within the past 24 hours? Okay. So in some shape or fashion, you have used an aspect of location, whether you realized it or not, in order to get somewhere or get information about a particular place. And this is not an area that is not being paid attention to. You have the development and continual growth of what is called the location intelligence market, LI. This is growing by leaps and bounds across multiple industries right now. We can see this happening in retail, we can see it happening in manufacturing, utilities and energy, as well as the entertainment industry. Globally, actually, this was set at $8 billion back in 2016. As you see here in this graph, it showed for North America in particular, it was valued at $2.6 billion in 2016. But by 2025, it's expected to grow by 15%. And this is being driven by IoT, the Internet of Things. It's being driven by smart devices and networks that are constantly identifying ways to connect to location, whether it's indoors or outdoors, and how much of this is driving this growth of the location intelligence market. At the end of the day, location data is being captured by each and every one of us and used in different ways by different technologies, different companies in that regard. As part of this, there's a huge analytics market that is growing from this as well. GIS, geographical information systems, as well as spatial analytics are big markets right now that are spending a lot of money to figure out how to analyze all this location data that's coming in, and again, supplying that out to particular individuals who are making decisions from this location data as part of the overall location intelligence industry. And in particular, with GIS and spatial analytics, as you can see here in these two graphs, it's basically expected to grow to $88 billion globally by 2020. That's only a couple of years away from now. And again, this is due in part to IoT, to smart city initiatives that are happening globally around the world, GIS and 3D technology that are really transforming the way in which we look at how information is being geographically positioned as well as analyzed. And on the other side of this, we can see exactly how is this location data actually being taken in and analyzed in companies. There's a company called Cardo. They're based out of Spain. They have been working in the location intelligence area for several years now, and they produce a survey every year in which they survey C-level executives at companies to ask them about how they use location data. And I wanted to point out a couple of insights about this because it leads to the bigger picture. In particular, with the specific companies that they surveyed, 94% of C-level respondents had said that they were collecting location data. 94%. So they are capturing information on what people are doing in the spaces and places where they're consuming those products or services. Each and every one of us in this room is a location data point for some particular company or technology for that particular organization. And when you look at the future, these C-level executives recognize that this is an important part of their future and that they need to spend more resources and pay more attention to location data and location intelligence. They see this as a crucial part of their strategy moving forward. So again, bigger picture, this means that they're looking at ways in which they can harness this location data to be able to provide perhaps the best product or the best service to their customers or their clients in that regard. And more emphasis on figuring out how to get that location data from their audiences or their publics or their customers. And with this, the same survey, I asked them exactly how are you collecting this location data? What does it come to in terms of capturing it? And in actuality, considering the time frame that we are now in, it's still very macro in terms of how they're capturing this location data. It's primarily at the state, the region, the city, zip code, and country level. However, there are untapped areas yet to be harnessed when we look at it from a micro standpoint, even getting down to the point of neighborhood in many cases, or actual blocks, neighborhood blocks. So all this to say is that C-level executives, companies across multiple industries are looking at the importance of location data and harnessing this information to make decisions that drive what the company or organization does next. However, when you look at the news industry, you don't quite see this happening in the same way. And we can see that location is being implemented in multiple ways. Just a few weeks back, Amazon announced its Echo Auto, where it's going to be on the road and allow for you to get things on the call through its voice AI. Location is going to be a crucial part of this and in most vehicles, autonomous vehicles as well in the future. So the role in which location data combined with news organizations is going to be crucial for people to get news in the moment passing that particular school, that city that they've never been to, that state that they've never visited. There's also the ongoing development and growth of location mapping inside buildings. Technology previously hasn't been able to capture this very well, but in recent years, a company called ISRI has they launched this indoor mapping system this past summer in July out of California. And other companies are following suit, in which they can identify your location in the building, whether you're on the 5th floor or you're sitting in an office on the 2nd floor, and exactly knowing that location data. Now, some of this can be considered a little big brother, right? Right, and figuring out your location and where you are. And you can see that potential issue. However, on the other side of it, there's a lot to be garnered in terms of the insights of how we move around in spaces and places, and how we make meaning and context from all of this as well. Within the news industry, location is more important than ever. There was a study that came out just a few weeks ago from Pointer that was identifying how across the country from this North Carolina School of Media that U.S. communities have lost news coverage in more than 1,300 communities. That represents a significant loss of each and every community, neighborhood, not having the information and knowledge that they need to know exactly what's happening down the street in the neighborhood next door. And so with this is a big area that I have been studying for the past several years, and looking at the intersection of location with mobile technology and journalism, to figure out exactly how is this evolving, how is it developing, and what are the ways in which news consumers are getting this kind of information, as well as how the journalists and reporters are transforming their work, considering location as an element. So I want to share with you a little bit of some of the research that I've been doing in this area just recently, and looking at the aspect of looking at microlocation, specifically to the news that is proximate to your location, geolocation, in that moment. This is developed from a concept that I've been working on for several years now called spatial journalism. Spatial journalism basically is an emergent form of journalism that incorporates space and place and location that's either physical, augmented, and virtual into the process and practice of journalism. So a lot of the things that we've been hearing about today as well as yesterday, again, touch upon the points of whether location is a geographical place, a physical place, or whether it's virtual, experiencing it through a virtual means, or augmented, where it's overspliced on top of the physical world. And so I've been embarking on some research over the past year in particular, looking nationally at how news consumers are taking in this kind of content from their mobile device and the ways in which they're doing so, as well as looking inside the newsroom to understand exactly how is location transforming the news work that journalists are doing, and how that ends up in the final story that the public reads. So I wanted to share with you a few of the results from this. I've done 4 national surveys over the past year and 2 city-level surveys as well. This will be coming out in some forthcoming research later this year and into early next. Just to give you some brief demographics about the research. This particular survey was launched in May. About 745 people. It was a stratified sample, so it was stratified by gender, 52% female, 48% male, to represent the United States Census breakdown by gender. Most of the respondents were young, between the ages of 25 and 44, a very young segment of the population. Most of them had a bachelor's degree, and 91% were getting news from this device, which again reflects a lot of the other existing research out there that has shown how much people are getting news here first than any other platform. Interestingly, too, in terms of looking at the platform in which they're consuming this from, 56% were on Android, and 38% were on iOS. So in this particular survey, as well as the other 3 nationally I've done, the results were similar. So I didn't want to show all 4 surveys to you because they'd be the same results. But the consistency is there. And it helps to show and explain that people do find location important. 70% of people want geolocated news. They want news proximate to the immediate location in which they are to help them have a better understanding of that moment or the space or place that they're in. So with that said, I wanted to know, well, if they are getting this kind of news, where are they getting it from in particular? And so 32% of them actually said that they're currently getting it from. Surprise, surprise, who's the one that's giving it to them under that 32%? Anyone want to take a guess? I heard someone say Facebook. Anyone else want to take a guess? Twitter? Snapchat? Okay, where else? Big one that no one has mentioned yet. Google. Majority of respondents said Google. Now, of course, Google News operates off of the news of those communities. But when it came down to it to say exactly where are you getting your geolocated news, it wasn't their hometown newspaper. It wasn't their news radio station. It wasn't the news TV station. It was Google. So again, with this particular moment in time that we're in, technology companies have the potential, and are already showing in some cases, their branding efforts to drive the idea of location and news versus the actual news organizations in those communities. It was a very interesting point. Furthermore, I wanted to find out exactly if they are wanting this kind of news and they are trying to get it, what context do they want it? Right, going back to those examples I was mentioning to you at the beginning, where are those places that they're trying to seek this information from? And so 83% identified where they live, work, and play as the places in which they want this kind of geolocated news. 78% where their family and friends live, which may be different from where they are and where they live. 79% for personal travel and 60% for business travel, so those places that they may have gone to. Now again, this may seem common sense. Well, of course, these are places that people go through every day. However, identifying the context and the moment in which you might be at the football game, and you guys are here versus there, right, is very different than if you are in California visiting a friend and you want to know what's happening here at the game, at the football field, right? Knowing exact news and information in those moments. Or if you're in perhaps the workplace and you want to know exactly what's just happened at the community center that you visit on the weekends, even though you're at work. That context is important in terms of driving that news-seeking behavior and that news consumption. Research has shown, studies have shown that oftentimes we consider news consumption from the standpoint of a ritual that we may have in the morning or the evening or during breaks of consuming news that's based off of time, but not so much based off of context and where we are in that moment and what's around us, the places and spaces that we visit that have meaning and significant importance to us. Second, I wanted to find out exactly where are they preferring this kind of news experience. So in what kind of physical sense do they see this coming to them through their mobile? 65% identified distance, so how far something was from their actual location, so whether it was a mile away or further. 60% by neighborhood. Interestingly, 46% by time. So whether something was 5 minutes away from them, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and context, 46% in context. So the actual meaning of that particular space and its relation to where they are at that moment. And again, we often think about news consumption habits coming down to a specific moment in time or even at, again, a very basic geographic level of the city. But again, the research is showing, in particular with this group of respondents and the 3 other surveys I've done, it's not representative of the whole US population, but it does give us some insights to understanding a different aspect of how we are consuming news through these devices, and how location is playing an important role. Furthermore, I wanted to find out exactly what are some of the topics that people want to know about with this. And when I jumped into this, I wasn't quite sure how people were going to respond to the topics. No surprise, 85% weather and traffic, right? That's up at the top in terms of what people are wanting to know based on where they are. That's why I'm wearing a turtleneck today, because it was 40 degrees when I left the hotel this morning, right? Having the sense of knowing what the weather is going to be in my exact location at that moment in time, or knowing which roads I need to go on for avoiding traffic that afternoon, which I'm sure many of you might be looking at this afternoon after the games ended and the conference is over. 79% wanted to know about crime, exact crime that was happening in their immediate area in that moment. 75% for entertainment, and 65% for local government and politics, which I think is a crucial, important point. When we look at the climate that we are now in today, and with elections coming up pretty soon all across the country, this drives again to the point of how important location is, and people wanting to know exactly what people are making major decisions on in their communities that's going to have implications in the years to come in particular. So with this research, again, this is only a couple of the highlights from it, but I wanted to share again with you some of the aspects of how news consumers within these particular samples are really thinking about news consumption that in some cases is different from how news organizations have approached location. And there's a gap that's there that has not yet been met. But again, there are ways in which this is changing. We can see location being used in the newsroom in a different sense. Yusuf was talking about earlier how the who, what, when, and where are going to be automated in the future. And that is quite true. But the how and why are not. Right? That's where the important context comes in. But the aspect of the where, we often think of, well, it's just the place of where that particular story took place. But there are other ways in which location is now being thought of differently within the newsroom and by the journalists. We can see this through the development of some micro-location platforms and services. Bloom, for instance, Banjo, Cardo, which I had mentioned already, all focus on providing services to news organizations that focus on location and geolocation, and helping the news organization weave this into their news process. Banjo, in particular, has developed a sophisticated platform that allows for news organizations and journalists to have information geographically shown to them through a map of news that's happening in that immediate area, and information from multiple sources to help verify and corroborate what's going on. But on the other side of this, they're also providing an opportunity for new storytelling practices and distribution practices as part of their platform. That again is changing a lot of approaches of how reporters are considering location as they're going about covering a story in their community. The other side to this is that location is providing a sense of ideas that may not have been approached before. By geographically showing what stories are being covered and in what context in specific communities, gives them further insight over a period of time to know that perhaps this neighborhood or this other community has some more richness to show in terms of newsworthy events, more coverage that can be gained from that particular community and covering that public. And lastly, this is one that I think is on the horizon. I have not seen this implemented yet, but I think we will start to see this soon, is the implementation of GIS in location analytics in the newsroom. And this looks at the idea of taking geographic information systems, which are currently being used to map data for news stories and put it out to the public as a data visualization. But on the other side of this, it provides an editorial tool and platform for them to understand exactly how and where are they covering in those communities that they are not. To help them have a better understanding, going back to the point of those 1,300 communities that do not have any news coverage, to have an opportunity to make the news coverage better in recognizing those areas or regions that they may have neglected over time. And so that aspect of GIS analytics, I think, is yet to come and will be in the newsrooms in the future as we see more of how location is being weaved into the newsroom practice in particular. So to conclude, I just want to bring up a couple of important points. Again, we're right now at the tip of the iceberg of thinking about location intelligence within the media industry. It has been implemented in other industries, but I think we are now starting to get to the point where it has its potential of looking at it for the news industry and for reporters. And how much mobile technology is going to be a crucial factor to this. Because again, the location data points that come through this are going to allow for reporters to have a much better sense of their community and who is consuming the news and in where and what locations and in what context in particular. But I think the bigger point out of all of this too is that the idea of a micro-located news experience is happening now. And news organizations need to be aware of it and know that this is what news consumers are seeking out and wanting in their daily news practice, their daily news ritual. And if they're not going to get it from the news organization in their hometown, Google or some other company may fill that spot. And how does that have implications for journalism in the future is something that we have to question and think about. Contextual sensitivity and contextual awareness are a big part of the way, again, which we move around in our day-to-day life. And how much that is another important point to how journalism needs to transform and thinking more about that aspect of context. Going back again to the how and the why versus just the 4 W's. And lastly, I think time, location, and context, TLC, is an important part to all of this. The ingredients for the future news experience for the news consumer as well as for the news organization and journalists to think about. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of some ideas to ponder, some forward-thinking thoughts. I welcome any questions that you might have.
Do you study advertising and public relations and their use of location? I'm thinking specifically of things like geofencing around stores. And what can journalism learn from advertising in its, what I think is much more sophisticated use of location?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we can learn from other fields, just as you said, in terms of looking at the developments of the research that's being done in advertising and marketing that is burgeoning with location intelligence research and showing how location data analytics is helping companies to really create new strategies and campaigns of how they reach their consumers in different ways. It was interesting, there was actually, the business schools now are also delving into this. There was a study from Harvard Business School, this was probably 6 months ago, in which they looked at Yelp data and they compared it against some other business data sets to see exactly how a particular community was developing. And they were actually able to corroborate the data to show that in areas that had new restaurants, that had new businesses come through as a result of people posting to Yelp, it actually was in line with the business data showing the growth of that particular community. And in many cases is starting to give insights to urban planners and city government as they decide what areas they're going to develop in or not. So I think the aspects of looking at these other industries like advertising, like marketing, urban planning, geography, human geography, all these other disciplines are delving into this and have been for quite a while. And I think the journalism industry can learn a lot from them in terms of the insights of looking at it. I've been doing other research aside from this that looks at the content analysis of mobile news apps over the past 6 years. And surprisingly, a lot of the mobile news apps of different news organizations from across the country have the ability to do geolocation at the level of advertising. So they're able to send out an advertisement to you that's in your vicinity. But in terms of connecting it to the editorial side, we have not yet seen. So thank you for that question. I don't know if that helps answer.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about getting this on my partner.
Is this on? Okay. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the ethical implications of location. I'm particularly thinking about if we serve people stories that are only near them, are we doing them a disservice by not exposing them to other things in the world, like putting them more in the information bubble?
Excellent question. Thank you. Yeah, so when we look at this, right, we can say, well, on one hand, if you're getting information or news that's only provided to your proximate location, they end up being in a particular news bubble. And certainly that is a possibility. Certainly that is. But when we look at the greater studies, too, that have been done on news consumption, people do aspire to get news and information from outside that community, within that particular city, or even around the world. So I don't think it's going to completely make everyone wear blinders. I think it's going to actually improve the way in which people get their news by seeking out these different forms of context that they didn't have before, that they're going to end up seeking that particular habit with other subjects on a national or international level to be more aware of what's going on. I think the other side of this that too poses a challenge is the privacy issues with location data. Right, as a development of the recent laws that passed in Europe with location in particular, that poses a challenge, right, in terms of providing the opportunity for people to opt in and opt out of having their location tracked. And so people having the opportunity to get information in their proximate location has to be something that they opt in for. It has to be a transparent process. Otherwise, news organizations are going to lose those readers for the long term and damage their long-term ROI with that particular audience as a result. There's been several location companies in recent years and within recent months that haven't been transparent about tracking location data of their users, and it has created a huge issue for them. In some cases, they've closed shop. So I think news organizations have to be aware of that and understand the ethical implications that can come along with that. So I think there's a lot to figure out in the years ahead as well on that privacy aspect and the ethical issues that can come along with that.
Do you think story forms, again, I'm sorry, I did, go ahead.
So, but we opt in and out of our location on our apps. So from that standpoint, if I'm searching for a restaurant, I've opted in for my location to be shown, right, that is at that restaurant. So the difference is I think you're saying is that if I'm sitting at the restaurant in downtown Lincoln, right? I'm a foreigner. I'm from another state, and I hear some shots, right? I want to know where those shots are.
Exactly.
Now, it might be a mobile journalist that shoots something and posts it up there. It's maybe not going to be curated through legacy media. It's going to be those microsite, local, like a community newspaper in real time.
Exactly.
So, I mean, there's no more community newspapers, really. I mean, there's no way to monetize that process. And I think what we're doing is monetizing it. And I don't know that, for me, it's not, my students, they think they can give up their data and they can give up their buying habits and stuff like that. And there's not a problem. The question is I just looked on Google News and I clicked on my local news, right? And what do I get? Jacksonville, Florida. I don't get my local news, you know, what's happening here. So that's what you were saying you're going to get. So I think it's really interesting concept. We'll see how. But there's not going to be money, just an observation, there's not going to be money in it for, I don't know, CNN to do microsites news. Won't be money there for them. Unless they sell the data to consumers, which is maybe is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's potential in terms of different revenue streams here. I think the thing is it's a long-term game in terms of looking at this and where it's heading. It's not something that's going to happen overnight for a news organization to make the investment in this. But I think you also, as a news organization, have to realize who your audience is. And if you're a CNN or if you're a New York Times, your audience is going to be perhaps national versus local. And I think the potential for this is really at that community level. The newspapers that are in every small, every town, small town, middle-sized town, big town, that represent that community, that I think this poses the biggest benefit to, where I think the national, international players can continue to focus on their national, international coverage, but that how much this helps those local communities have the ability to cover their communities and neighborhoods that so desperately need it right now. I think that's a crucial part to this. But I think the other side of it too is mindset. You can have the latest technology. The technology is there to do this. It exists. But I think it's a matter of mindset that really will make this be fully implemented. And recognizing a different aspect of thinking about location and its significance to the news consumer within the idea of how it shapes meaning of the places and spaces that we visit. I thank you for your comments.
I see a lot of benefit, I think, to combining what Kim was saying about story forms to what you're saying about location. And I'm thinking of things like, are the new stories new forms based on where we are? So in other words, if my phone knows that I'm standing in line at Starbucks and I'm probably, and I've stood in line here every day this week and it's always been about 3 minutes, pretty soon I get about a 2-minute news update. Versus if my phone knows that I'm walking down the sidewalk, I might just get a headline or nothing.
Exactly.
And so, her comment about standing in line at Target really, I think, does point out that knowing where we are will end up determining the type of story form we get. Okay, I was just
and what platform it is as well, right?
Okay.
So we may be thinking about mobile right now too, but you have the huge development of voice AI right now that's growing by leaps and bounds. It's going to be setting the path for the next 10 years too. And how much voice AI with location is going to really transform how people think about the news that's immediate in their location if they're in their vehicle or wherever they might be as well.
Okay.
Definitely.
Thanks, Amy. For journalists looking to do some sort of flavor of spatial journalism, what tools should they start with if they don't have any in their toolbox currently?
Well, I think part of it is thinking about location differently, like I just mentioned. So it's a matter of mindset. Thinking about not just the where as the location in which that crime has happened, but identifying the bigger space of why crime is happening in that particular community, and getting a sense of that community overall, and the places that are shaping how that community has developed into perhaps a crime-ridden area, instead of thinking of it as a crime story to go cover. So I think one of it is mindset and thinking location differently. The other side of it, I think, is thinking about the aspect of how location can be weaved into the news process. So again, going back to the example about the news communities and being able to map them being able to actually see for yourself as a reporter, where have I been spending more of my time? Doing an audit of your own reporting and getting a sense of, am I spending more of my time in this particular neighborhood or this particular community? Where are there other communities that might need more attention? So doing a self-audit of their actual geographical work in that regard, and figuring out perhaps that they may need to spend time in one area more than another. That may end up generating more ideas in the process as well. In some of the research I've been doing with different newsrooms, this has come to light for some news organizations and for some of the journalists that have recognized that the map is also helping them to recognize some of their potential flaws with their reporting and how they can make their reporting better. So I think there's some aspects of that too. Lastly, I would say is part of it is using different tools that can help bring to light location a little bit more. So as I was mentioning earlier, looking at tools like Bloom or Banjo, for instance, or even Snapchat, that again open up the idea of looking geographically in a physical area, about what is being said, how it's being said, how is it being shaped, and not just in that one moment of time, but looking over a greater period of time, perhaps weeks or months, for instance, to really get a sense of what might be happening in that community as well. So those would be a couple of different approaches, I would say, that could help reporters in terms of moving in this particular area. And lastly, the one other part is going out and talking with the public and the community, really getting a sense from them what they see as their community. This is another forthcoming paper I'm doing, but I asked in the surveys too, how do you define your community? How do you define your neighborhood? And I'm just now starting to weed through the results. But it's very interesting in terms of how people define their community, define their neighborhood. That often doesn't match up in many cases with a news organization in which they see a particular city or perhaps by neighborhood, but they may have actually identified a 5-block radius as their community or a particular community center or a significant other space or place in their community that unites them as a community instead. So I think it's a matter of also going out and engaging with the public to ask them, who is your community? Who is the actual neighborhood that you feel you represent or that you're a part of? So I think there's that aspect to it too. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of quick announcements. Hang with us through the afternoon. We've got 3 more great ones coming up. The last one is Matt Waite talking about drones, and there'll be a drone flying exhibition demonstration. Also, we have Zach Weiss talking about preparing for the end of the smartphone. I don't know why we're talking about that at a conference about mobile media, but anyway, he's going to talk about ending everything we're doing here. And Zach Wade is going to talk about building a relevance machine at CNN. One quick thing, the 2 of them are going to flip on the schedule, so Zach Wise will start at 1 o'clock talking about the end of the smartphone, and then Zach Wade will talk about the relevance machine at CNN at 2 o'clock. Those 2 speakers are flipping because of flight schedules, and other than that, lunch is available in the Centennial Room just out to the steps and over to the left. We'll see you back here.